So welcome to this event. It's about storytelling through crises, creative responses to climate and biodiversity. My name is Bill Finnegan. I'm a doctoral student at the School of Geography and the Environment, and my research is looking at how secondary schools in the UK are responding to the climate crisis. And very excited to bring you all together for this. We've got students from the Oxford Sustainable Schools Network, students from the Buckinghamshire Sustainable Schools Network, and then other people who might have found out about this through some local groups. And so I'm just going to give a very brief introduction and provide some context for this, and I'm going to pass it over to the rest of the panel. The first thing is to just mention some of the partners. So first, thanks to the Oxford University Museum of Natural History for hosting us and for being a partner throughout my digital storytelling project. Also, this event is part of the Festival of Social Science at the University of Oxford, and they also provided some funding for the students from Aylesbury to come. And then it's also part of the Climate Crisis Thinking in the Humanities and Social Sciences Network's events for COP26. So the UK Universities COP26 network has an innovation showcase, and it's got presentations on technology, on finance, on policy, but this group is also making sure that there's also conversations around humanities and culture and the arts as part of that. And so that's actually a good time for me to mention that we're recording this. So there's a filmmaker in the back who's recording this so that we can share it with people who couldn't be here today. And so most of that is just the panel conversation, but afterwards we'll have a little bit of a pop-up exhibition in the space next to us. And so if you don't want to be filmed, just let me know after this. We'll just either make sure that we don't film you, or if you accidentally were filmed, we can make sure we don't include that in anything that goes out. And then, again, thanks to the two networks that are here and making up most of the participants. It's great to kind of bring you together in person. We're halfway through the second week of COP26. And so in some small way, kind of we're connected to what's happening in Glasgow by through this event here today. And I really appreciate you all coming, especially on your evening. So we've got two different projects we're sharing. One is about digital storytelling and climate futures, and another is a really wonderful collaboration that involves ecology, poetry, and art. And so I'm actually going to pass it over to the other panelists first. I wasn't going to necessarily introduce everyone, but I'll just pass it over to Trisha, Neeli, and Sarah, who are going to share their collaboration.
How about Sarah? You want to start
Would you like me to start with my poem?
Yes.
No, Trisha, I'm so sorry. I misremembered.
Yeah. So I think you can start off with the poem and maybe an introduction of yourself, and then I can carry on.
Okay.
Does that work?
It's very short. Shall I stand up? So I'll just read the poem, and it's very short, and it was used by the artist and based on ideas from Trisha, the scientist. And it tries to make a journey from fear to hope, which is how we all hope to be able to. Can't hear? Oh, right.
I'm afraid that's actually just going to the camera, so that...
Shall I speak more clearly? I'm going to start by reading a poem which I hope encapsulates what we hope to get out of COP26. We're surrounded by things that worry us with evident climate change. What can we do about it? And we're going to be telling you about a bit of collaborative artwork which aims to think about how we might take this forward, what we can do about it. And basically the answer is to let life get on with it, because it can invent itself, renew itself, it should be allowed to do so. So this is about Trisha's project, which is on woodland restoration, and that's the title of the poem, Woodland Restoration. Among new portents, eroding stratosphere, pandemic eruption, our falling towers, gather up salvage. What can be saved? Let life rewrite itself. Atoms of words, molecules of proteins, books of DNA in libraries of trees. Salvage first editions from the burning. Garner and bank seeds, capsules of local know-how. Let expert jays plant acorns in the grass. Oaks spring up from flowered thickets. new roots restore life to scraped earth, and new branches resound with old songs. Thank you.
Okay, so to give you some introduction, thank you, Sarah. I'm Trisha Gopalakrishna. I am a DPhil student in the same cohort as Bill at the School of Geography and Environment, and my research is about forest restoration for climate change mitigation. So the concept is that if we were to restore forests in different areas, how much carbon could be locked up by them, and hence that would help in limiting global warming and limiting rise in temperatures. So my research basically looks at where to restore forests and what are the trade-offs between different benefits that forests provide, not just climate change mitigation, but then habitat for biodiversity and also water services. There are many, many benefits that they provide. So this collaboration, which we will talk to you about, is based on some of my research, and the main idea, or at least the main motivation for me that I had in mind when I was deciding whether I should be a part of this collaboration, is that forest restoration is being spoken about as like a silver bullet for the climate crisis. All of you must have heard about tree planting and how it's a major political agenda now in the UK especially, but also in many different parts of the world, and also in global forums such as COP26 that's happening. And it's not as simple as tree planting. You can't plant a bunch of trees and you expect carbon dioxide to be sequestered through the process of photosynthesis. It's way more complicated than that. And in addition to the intricateness through the ecology and the environmental science bit of it, we have to keep in mind a lot of the social and financial and economic and cultural context of where restoration is done. So it's very context specific, and all of this information is lost, at least I think, when we speak about all the political agendas as well as various pledges that are being made in forums like COP26. And I think that was my main motivation, is that I wanted my research to be communicated to especially emphasize this intricate nature. And there are a couple of photos to give you an example of my research, how naturally regenerating forests, which could have diverse tree species like the one you are seeing on the screen, which is a naturally regenerating forest in Glen Nevis, which is in the valley of Ben Nevis, which is the tallest mountain, as you know, in the UK, versus, if you go to the next picture, Bill, thank you, like plantations, which are monocultures, so plantations of single tree species. So in the UK, and maybe Sarah knows a lot more, so and she can add on, of different sorts of commercial tree species. Like the picture that you see is from the southern part of Cairngorms, and there are a lot of plantations of Sitka spruce and many different commercial timber species. And this is the sort of detail that my research goes into. And it's basically the point being that it's not as simple as plant a bunch of trees and that'll help with global rise in temperatures. And another main reason for the collaboration that we will speak about in a bit, that encouraged me to think about this more and connect it to the whole aim of this panel about storytelling, is I think that climate change and including different strategies such as forest restoration is everybody's problem. It's not just the scientists, it's not just the policymakers, it's not just the people, practitioners or the local communities, it's even people like us who live in cities like London and Oxford and Delhi and New York, and I think all of us need to be part of the dialogue. But I think it's very hard when many people don't understand the nuances of the science and the complicatedness of different issues. And I think that's why storytelling and also involving different demographics of people, in this case artists and poets, to think about how we can think about these issues is important. So that's the motivation, another motivation with which I think I went into this project. And I also think that storytelling is a good way and is definitely an integral part of how we're supposed to be thinking about climate, biodiversity, and various other issues that we are and will continue to face. So with that, I think I will pass it on to Sarah, who can tell us a little bit about our project, which you will actually see if we go on to that section of the museum, and also Neeli will speak about it after Sarah. If I could ask you, why did you want to take part in this collaboration? And
well, I have to give you a little bit of biography first. I spent my working life, which I've retired from, as a researcher, a science researcher and teacher in the Department of Plant Sciences here. And that was because I loved science and I loved nature, and I wanted to spend my time exploring it further. But what I had to give up in my school at the age of 14 was I had to decide if I was going to be a scientist or an arts person. I actually did incredibly well at English, and I always felt this was unfinished business. So when I retired as a scientist, at least not as a scientist, but as a teacher and researcher, I went and studied writing poetry, and I found I was really quite good at it. I've published some, and what people liked about my poetry was the fact that I was a scientist and that the science sort of came up in the poetry. I wasn't trying to write teachery sort of didactic poetry, but it was just there. So, and now I see quite a lot of people are doing this, and there is a whole new genre of poetry called informed nature writing, and this is a fantastic way to get a dialogue going of the sort Trisha's been talking about. So I completely agree about the idea of complexity. Life first started on Earth with single cells 4.5 billion years ago, and we don't know what life is. So only about a couple of hundred years ago, everybody thought that the way all the variety in life, the whole of biodiversity, had been created once, bang, by God. And 4,000 years ago, all the animals, all the plants, absolutely everything, and then Adam was put in charge, give them names, and you run the whole thing, have dominion over it. And nobody educated really believed it was as simple as that, but Darwin was the person who produced the evidence that it wasn't a one-off thing. It's much more interesting than that, and God is much more interesting than that, because and I'll just read you the quotation that people produce. Because Darwin was upset that Darwin was worried that his wife would be very upset, and a lot of people would be upset. And it took him a long time to get these ideas into print, just because he was a decent family man. But finally he wrote a consoling sentence, and he said that from so simple a beginning, one cell, endless forms, most beautiful and most wonderful, have been and are being evolved. So it's an ongoing process. It isn't all done and dusted. It is much more complex, exactly as Trisha had said. And every creature has a niche and a role in an interacting ecosystem, and on land, life produces of its own accord ecosystems, prairie, forest, desert, and all their creatures, including us. And so we are part of the fabric of life. And a lot of people used to think that human beings are different, but we're not. We're part of the fabric of life, and we can't pretend we're not, and that's part of the problem. What else did I want to say? Well, yes, what does poetry do? Poetry works as a bridge of words between the scientific facts and our imagination, and if you can capture people's imagination, you will get them to listen and be interested in what you say. And you can do this by talking to each other, so you don't have to say, I am a scientist, I am an arts person, and nothing else. You're all human beings, you're all part of the fabric of life, and it's your job to jolly well understand that and talk about it to each other. So don't feel put off. If you're an English expert, don't feel scientists are unapproachable. Scientists are terribly keen to tell you stuff. Ask them it. And similarly,
true.
That's true, isn't it? And arts people are extremely keen to learn about science, although they pretend they're not. They say, oh, I'm not a geek, I'm not a nerd, tell me more about ancient Greece or something. But really, they're a bit nervous, and they would love you to tell them about science, but they don't dare say so. At least that's how it is in Oxford. Okay, so Trisha explained her science, and the point is that different kinds of woodlands will form by themselves. So when I was tasked to write a poem about woodland restoration, and the idea of complexity struck me, but also Trisha was explaining to me how we've got all sorts of wrong ideas about woodlands. You do not have to plant them, because not only do seeds grow by themselves, but animals help to plant them, and that's what I was referring to when I said, let expert jays plant acorns in the grass. You can see these birds doing that, and you do see the oak trees coming up, and the little saplings are protected by brambles, and it all works, and an oak forest will happen if it's the right place for it. The other thing I wanted to say is, what did I want to say? Yes, I simply wanted to use this metaphor to talk about this web of ideas growing a wood is like creating a web of ideas, and then it was my job to talk to Neeli about this, and I wasn't going to say, here is my textbook, Neeli must illustrate it, and Neeli put me right here. You've got to let the artist rip. You can't just say, do a picture of a wood, do a picture of a fungus. Take the thing and run with it. And so all I did was just listen to Trisha, and their group allowed me to go to lab meetings. They were very, very welcoming to me. And so I thought about this stuff, and I let it ferment in my mind, and I talked about it to Neeli, and then Neeli picked it up, and she produced these absolutely beautiful images which convey this whole idea of complexity and self-generation. So I've said enough.
Thank you, Sarah. That was really beautiful. So, hi, my name is Neeli Malik. I'm an artist and printmaker based in London. I graduated from the Ruskin 2 years ago, and I'm currently studying print at the Royal College of Art. My practice primarily concerns itself thinking about the Anthropocene, the world that we live in, where nature is said to be formed by human activities. But actually what I'm concerned with is thinking beyond that, thinking to the future, and in some way, sometimes I look at things that are optimistic, like this work I feel like was very optimistic, and sometimes I think about things that are apocalyptic and in between, and worlds with humans and worlds without humans, and worlds where humans and non-humans sort of merge into interesting things. So it's interesting, Sarah, you were talking about working with scientists and artists, and how sort of becoming cross-disciplinary allows us to take thoughts and ideas into directions that we wouldn't expect. So I wanted to make art about ecologies, and I wanted to sort of delve deeper into climate science, but I'm not a scientist. My family are all scientists, and they were a little bit surprised that I wanted to be an artist. It took some persuading. So I wanted to join this program, the ABC network, where artists and scientists were linked together. And I thought that Trisha's research was really interesting. It was also, so I was very keen to work with her. It was sort of when we got started, I then got a little bit overwhelmed because, again, I don't come from a scientific background, and Trisha was like, here's some very cool academic papers, here's a lab meeting, here's this research, here's that research, you can work with the whole lab at anything you want. And I was like, oh my God, I don't understand. I understood the papers, I could read it, and I was like, okay, there's some really cool research going on here, but I have art block, I have no idea how to translate this into a piece of work that really gives justice to the research. And that's why I wanted to come into this project. I wanted to make something meaningful and not just surface level, because the work I was making before, I was like, oh, climate, I'm gonna draw a picture of a jellyfish. And it just sort of wasn't hitting the mark I wanted it to. And that's why it was really great to also have a group of three, and to have Sarah here as well, because Sarah does have a scientific background. And so she really delved straight into the science and Trisha's research, and was able to produce some very wonderful poetry. You actually produced a couple of poems, and we settled on woodland restoration, and you sort of rewrote it as well. And that was a really nice sort of bridge to work with, to sort of delve into it more creatively. I think one of the worries when making the work was I didn't want it to be like an illustration of a poem, but I was sort of a bit nervous with collaboration. There's always sort of like you have to consider the other person, so I was sort of almost a bit nervous to approach it with Sarah, and I was like, the words are not going to be on the page and then a picture, but Sarah was very much like, do whatever you want with it, you know, have creative control. So I sort of had the words like twisting their way through this like wilding woodland, and you know, we're here talking about storytelling, and I wanted it to be a narrative, which is why I chose it to be a concertina booklet, which you will see afterwards. It's laid out. It exists sort of like as a sculptural thing, so it can stand up by itself, but also you can just flip through it like a booklet.
I have some slides. Do you want me to? Here, I'll just. So, is there anything you wanted to say about these before we get to the book?
Yeah, so actually a really important part of the process of making is we first met in person at Whiteham Woods, which is... Trisha, do you want to talk a little bit about Whiteham?
Yeah, so Whiteham Woods, to all of you who don't know, and Sarah you can add in, because Sarah was the resident poet at Whiteham for a bit, is an experimental forest site, just about half an hour biking from Oxford, so it's even closer, I guess, if you have a car. And it's where the researchers at the geography department, the biology department, the zoology department run all these cool experiments studying everything, all the trees, all the nutrients, the leaves, the badgers, the birds, the insects. So you have a bunch of students out there running all these experiments, and that's where primarily my lab group, because I'm based in geography, also work. And this was a nice area that we thought, which is logistically possible considering COVID and all of the regulations over the summer, to provide some sort of inspiration for the piece, which I know we've been speaking about for the last 10 minutes and you actually don't really know what it is, but you will hear about it now. But that's Whiteham Woods. And you see like images of us out at Whiteham Woods. You can, and that's like the carbon flux star, because we measure all sorts of processes for about productivity of different types of tree species, and that's about the canopy, and those are other members of our lab group, which is the ecosystems lab group.
So it was really great. So we were able to go up to this really wonderful canopy, very high up, actually quite frightening to climb up for me. But all of the visual imagery in the piece, which by the way is called the Salvage Eaters, and uses Sarah's words from her poem Woodland Restoration. It all sources imagery from Whiteham Woods. So there are drawings. I saw a lot of very beautiful lichen. If you go to the first one, it's based on a drawing of lichen. I really like this one because I feel like it's quite abstracted, and the colours I use sort of make it a bit separated, but it's still like a sort of strange biological substance. So I've had some people say it looks like coral. Trisha, you said it looked like...
I had a completely different interpretation, which I think comes to the storytelling bit. Considering Sarah's words among Newportans, I actually thought of climate change. I thought these were like fumes of smoke and air pollution, and that's how I interpreted it. But then we met somebody who thought of it as corals, and so that's where like the storytelling comes in. It's like,
and for me, as soon as I saw this, I was absolutely delighted, because to me it says complexity.
Yeah.
And you could look at this thing and see, you can imagine it's just like walking through a wood where the more you look, the more you see.
Yeah, and it's interesting you talk about air pollution, because I think it mirrors different things, because lichen are very susceptible to air quality. Yeah. And actually that lichen, the original lichen that I drew was gigantic. I'd never seen lichen this big, and it was because we're on the canopy and the air is different up there. I don't know how exactly it's different. But yeah, it was very, very beautiful. I also took lots of pictures. Move on to the next one. We've got an example of a CMYK print. There are a few of those in there. I'll talk a little bit about technical process, but these are all hand printed. So it was a digital image, took on my camera, and then I split the color channels on Photoshop into cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, and converted it into a bitmap. So when you go and have a look, if you look really closely, that image is actually just tiny little dots. And so I printed yellow, tiny little dots, cyan, magenta, one at a time, and then I printed my little illustrations on top. So screen printing is quite a time-consuming process. It was quite meditative to do it. And yeah, there was just a lot of really beautiful little things there. So and the piece sort of goes in and out of scale. And I'm sort of categorized all the different bits of imagery that I used. But one thing that I used that was really amazing. If you go, I don't know,
it's the
next one after that. The next two. So this and also the other one. The blue things in the background are images that were kindly provided to me by Dr. Ali Shenkin, who joined us on our walk through Whiteham. And these are multispectral drone scans of Whiteham woods. And so all of the little broccoli, fuzzy things of blue in the background is a huge, huge scan of the woods. And it's not a picture of the woods, it's actually like a scan, which Trisha can explain better than me. I'll pass it on.
Well, I don't know how much detail you want to hear about drones and multispectral imagery, but then literally, as Neeli said, it's not just a picture of the canopy, but then it is a scan of everything understory as well. So you get a lot of detail about the leaf structure in the different canopy levels, and that helps, or at least helps us answer different questions about structure of different trees, which changes by species. Also, it gives us a lot of information about the phenological traits. So, for example, when seasons change, spring to summer, summer to fall, a lot of different sorts of trees, as you must have studied, deciduous and evergreen, they shed leaves and they turn brown and they turn green and all of that. So all of these sorts of phenomenon is being affected by climate change because of change in the climate, and that's one of the things our lab group studies, and that's why we have access to this imagery. It's because we fly a lot of drones across Whiteham quite regularly, and we recensus and we study all the phenological traits of different species during different times of the year, and we have a long record for the past about 18 years, I want to say. So anyway, passing it on to you.
So the part of the reason I use these drone scans is because they're beautiful, but they're beautiful without me actually getting my grubby hands on it. They just worked very well by themselves, but also because I wanted to introduce a sense of scaling in and scaling out. And that is something that, Sarah, you mentioned once in one of our early meetings.
Yes, I've always found this very interesting because the reason people go up on the walkway is to look at is to measure what Yadvinder Mali, the leader of Trisha's group, calls the breath of the forest. How much carbon dioxide goes in during the day with photosynthesis, how much oxygen comes out at night when they respire, and then you can tot up all the wood and see whether the wood that's being laid down compensates for the losses of carbon. And they did this very pleasing sum, which is that the assimilation of carbon by Whiteham Woods, which is, 500 acres? Or, a substantial forest, but it's compensating for a significant part of the university's emissions. So it's wonderful to think that Oxford University is kind of innocent because it's got this wood which is mopping up the No, that's not a good way to put it. But scale, you were asking me about scale. So the Yadvinder's group have the ability to report the condition of the forest to central sort of data processing. And one of the things that they collect data with is a satellite, an Earth observation satellite, which goes round and round the world in a series of orbits. So eventually it's making something like those spherical lampshades made out of string. It sort of covers the whole world, except I think not the polarized caps. So you can see a picture of what's happening all the time, and that's one of the ways they're looking at things. So you have this satellite image, which is a sentinel for climate change. And if you see, for example, that the wood is going brown at the wrong time of the year, that would be the sort of indication that things are going wrong from that huge spatial view. But at the same time, other people are looking at the diversity of bacteria in water-filled holes in beech trees. And I think this is one of the glorious things about nature. We're very sizist. We think things about 6 feet high are normal, and everything else is odd. But we're looking at the whole globe, and we're looking at tiny, tiny things. And they're all part of this whole process of getting in the sun's energy and generating complexity, and just only in a very brief little skin in between the boiling magma underneath our feet and the bare, dark space going off everywhere outside. You just live in this little rind, and we need to study it from global scale to microscopic, and even smaller than that, things we can't see.
Yeah, so that's sort of what I was thinking about when I had this big scale, and then these tiny little creatures, detritivores, that eat up dead things and poo and reintroduce these things back into the environment. So yeah, it was just a sense of scale that I wanted to introduce. I really wanted to think about like optimism and hope in this, get a bit mushy. I feel like it's very devastating to hear like news about the climate constantly. It feels extremely hopeless, but I also feel like there's two like common thought processes, which is that it's like abandon all hope, ye who enter here, just give like, you know, just feelings of giving up, and I certainly feel that as well. And then there's another sort of not very good line of thinking, which is that like some kind of techno fix will come and save us from our terrible crimes of killing the environment, like Elon Musk is going to come and save us. I also want to address the irony that I'm saying all this and I'm drinking from a plastic water bottle, but it is because my reusable water bottle broke. So I do have but I am reusing it. Sorry to go off topic. That yeah, I feel like both of those sort of like the techno fix or just give up hope, they're just not helpful for us. And yes, we have a sense of urgency, but we also need to have a sense of slowing down and considering things, and considering the complexity of things. And there's a wonderful phrase by Donna Haraway where she says we must stay with the trouble and consider it in hot compost piles. And I really love that, and I recommend people reading Donna Haraway's work. And so sort of stemming from that, I wanted to work with this project and have just a sort of sense of optimism come out of the work. Yeah.
I mean, that's probably a good transition to the other, was the last image, was there anything to say about that?
I don't know.
No.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's a nice hopeful last set of words by Sarah.
Yes, I realise now that I didn't set out to be hopeful, but actually it does end up bringing the humans back into the picture. When I wrote new woods resound with old songs, I suppose what was at the back of my mind was that how our pleasure in life comes from these complex ecosystems. We hear the birds and we want to sing ourselves. We go into the woods and we make music. Yes.
Great. I mean, thank you so much for sharing your project, and I think we'll come back. I mean, there'll be a chance for questions at the end, but Tam and I are going to share a little bit about our video and digital storytelling project around climate futures, and there's a lot of touch points between these and similar things. But I actually wanted to start just by showing you the animation that we produced together, and then we'll step back and talk about the process that got us there. So just give me a second as I switch gears.
Hey, it's you. Or me, same thing.
This might confuse you, but I'm you from the future.
I'm writing this from 2050. Things have changed so quickly.
I look back on the time you are living in with fondness.
The world today is different from the one you once feared, that filled you with hopelessness and frustration.
Should I tell you what the world will be like 30 years from now? Well, it can go in two ways.
Politicians did nothing to stop climate change. It was too little, too late.
The world is ablaze.
I'm talking about droughts and floods.
Numbers of climate refugees reached an all-time high this year.
I should be dead. I couldn't tell you how I made it to an underground bunker.
I'm hiding in my basement. I stayed at home for as long as I could, but we still ran out of food.
Nature can now only be found in history books and VR headsets.
You're shocked. You knew the way everyone treated this planet was bad, but you never thought it'd be this bad, did you? Did you? Did you? Did you?
Or it can go the second way.
The change that needed to happen did, slowly but surely, come about.
We are in what people have taken to calling the healing, a period of repair, of restoration, of rebuilding.
You started to drive electric cars.
Plastic-free shops became the norm.
Sustainable agriculture, lab-grown meat, solar farms, forest restoration.
It's beautiful, living without fear that the world will end soon.
It is up to you how much light there will be in the dark and what remains as an anchor of positivity, hope, and joy.
These next few months will decide the outcomes for generations to come.
Use your voice to be as loud as you can.
Our voices are louder together.
Make sure to look after yourself, love yourself, and keep making changes, no matter how small.
I'll leave you there, but keep your eyes open. Take care.
Back to the slides now. So that was beautifully illustrated and animated by Tem. So yeah, I'm. So it started with a process here in this room about a year ago, and so I've been leading digital storytelling workshops with groups of students, mostly sixth form students. In which they write these letters from the future. So write a letter from the year 2050. And a number of students who are here participated in an online workshop I did with Aylesbury High School, but also with students in London and the Midlands and Berkshire. And this builds on a tradition of digital storytelling that comes from the Story Center in California. But it's maybe worth defining a bit because we live in a world that is digital in terms of how we communicate, and we're surrounded by stories. We make sense of the world through stories. So Instagram is digital storytelling, but there's a particular approach to digital storytelling which is all about people whose voices are not necessarily reflected in the mainstream media, whose voices aren't always heard, giving them an opportunity to tell their story. And again, similarly, like on Instagram, we hear a lot about celebrities and influencers, and even though everyone's invited, you don't necessarily get the sense that everyone's story has equal value through that. But through the Story Center, they bring together people in workshops, and over a couple of days, they'll work together to find a story and tell it. And so again, first time I did it was over October half term here in the museum with some students. And the typical Story Center model is that you're reflecting back on your life. You're looking for some really important formative thing that happened to you, and then you write the script for it. So one person speaking, telling an important story, could be about 2 to 3 minutes long, and then you just have some visuals to go with it, and it could be some old photos. You could just walk around with a camera. It's a very kind of simple form, but it can also be very powerful. And the twist I did for my research was to have it be speculative. So instead of reflecting back, you're projecting into the future. kind of imagining what might happen, as a chance to explore hopes and fears, some of the things we've been talking about, and some of the things that come through the animation. And for me, this is actually part of my research. So I'm doing kind of traditional qualitative research where I interview people, have focus groups, do questionnaires. But then this is more of a kind of arts-based participatory action research. So bringing in some sort of artistic medium, working with the research subjects in the process, so participatory, they participate, and then action in the sense that rather than just writing this up for a paper that no one ever reads, I'm trying to get it out there and share it and hope that it kind of makes an impact in the world. So about 50 students have gone through this process so far, and again, there's a group in Aylesbury that I'll just mention that some of which are here that joined us. I started in person, but then had to adapt over COVID to do it remote and do it online, do it through Zoom. But I was always struck by the fact that the stories were still really powerful, even though we did it in lots of different ways. And I think one thing I'll say, and I'll pass it to Tem in a second, but is each story was really different, kind of a unique voice, unique perspective. And I was expecting them to kind of fall into these two kind of dystopia, utopia dichotomy. And actually, most of the stories combined that. They kind of recognize that these two things coexist simultaneously. And to some extent, that's our reality now. And there's a quote from a science fiction writer that the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. And people tend to think about that in terms of like the cool stuff, the Elon Musk stuff. Like some people have the cool stuff and others don't. But I think it's as much about the future crisis is a present day crisis, depending on who you are and where you are. Some people are on the front lines. Anyhow, the videos, a lot of nuance comes through in each of those individual stories. And to make this kind of collaborative art, we actually in some ways, had to strip some of that away, but also I think the layers are still in there to some extent. But after this, there's some iPads that are over in the other section next to Neeli's artwork, and you can actually watch a dozen or so videos if anyone has time to do that. So actually, I'll pass it over to Tim now to talk more about the process of making the animation.
Thank you, Bill. Yeah, I first wanted to just say how much I enjoyed hearing about your collaboration, and I would love to do something like that. And I guess, in a way, that's maybe what's drawn me to animation over the years. So it's not something I studied. I actually studied international relations at university, and then did a lot of community and education work for a long time before even veering into the arts in my late 20s. And I guess it's storytelling that took me there, because I felt like I was doing what I felt was important work in the world, and but yeah, there was something more that I wanted that I could give maybe through learning how to tell stories in different ways, and animation has become the place that I'm sitting at the moment doing that. But yeah, I took a very different route into it, and I think it's very enriching, even just whatever path you take, however you get there, it will enrich it in different ways. And collaborations, like you talked about, just inspire me so much. And I loved working with Bill on this project. I felt a lot of pressure, actually, more than I usually feel, I think, having so many people's voices to try and bring into one story, and then also sort of, having to put one sort of visual narrative to it. But it sort of needed it to tell the story. And I really enjoyed, I don't know if some of you were here, there was one session I think I joined, and it was right in the middle of the making process, when I think with animation all of your planning happens at the beginning, and then you sort of have to execute your ideas, and it becomes very laborious, some might say, and you sort of fall in, it's quite long process, so that's all frame by frame drawn. And I joined for one session, for a lunchtime session. I think some of the students are here, and just hearing, because you shared, it was a session where you actually shared your stories, and the amount of inspiration I got from just joining that session, that it really carried me through the rest of the process. So thank you. And the bravery it takes to stand up and share something that you've written and something that's personal to you, is huge, and it's such a gift to the world. And I guess I just feel really honoured to have been asked to do this project with Bill, because it feels like the material was so beautiful, of like people's real personal reflections, and you'll get to see some of the videos and experience that, hopefully.
It's very interesting what you and Neeli were saying about collaboration. I don't think I would have been able to collaborate in this way if we hadn't been facilitated by Anya, who's not here at the moment. Because one does have these worries, doesn't one? And you know, you're in completely different fields, and you feel there's a certain amount of ego is involved. You know, this is my stuff, and I don't want to be pushed into treating it differently. And I think unless I'd had such nice people to work with, and Anya to show me how, I wouldn't have been able to do it, because I've always been quite a selfish person in my creative activities. But to be helped to be sort of symbiotic, which is what the best sort of natural systems do. I mean, that's a bit of a moral judgment, isn't it? But I mean, predators are lonely in the end.
Yeah. There was actually a lot of, we're just one of many groups as part of the Art, Biodiversity and Climate Network, facilitated by Anya Glazer. If you're interested, it's also known as the Flute and Bowl Network, which also was sort of funded by Torch.
That's right. Yeah, one of the Torch networks.
Yeah, one of the Torch networks. So if you want to check out any other artworks, we had an exhibition in here just last Friday, but it's all online. We've got an online exhibition in the catalogue, and there's some really amazing artworks, a lot of them based in Oxford.
Yeah, and there are a lot of research groups as part of the program that worked with the artists to create the different pieces, if you look it up.
Great.
You might want to take part in it.
I definitely do.
I'll give you, I'll let you know after the panel.
That would be great.
See how the networks self-assemble.
So Tem, I just put some of the storyboard images up just because I thought that was interesting to see the process. But was there anything else that you wanted to share about the process of making the animation?
Since you've landed on that image, it was really nice working with Bill, because often, so with animation, you sort of you make your storyboard and then you sort of sign it off with your kind of client, and then you don't change things. But Bill was okay with me changing things. And like this end image, I really struggled with, actually. The dystopia was super easy. It was like, you know, that like visualizing dystopia. I mean, I kept it very abstract, and I think I've had to visualize utopias a lot in films that I've made, and it's like you fall on the same imagery, and it was nice to just be allowed to do something a bit more abstract. And I was actually reading a book, an incredible book, when I was making it, and I changed this last image based on the book Finding the Mother Tree. Have you read that?
Yes.
Yeah, it's quite. She's like an incredible forest ecologist kind of person, and like it's just a really incredibly beautiful book about trees, and that image at the end had to change, because for me, like, there had to be this mother tree, and it's all about like her research is all about how forests communicate with each other, and there's mother trees that actually like look after the other trees in the forest, and they share resources and information in forests, and that's been her lifelong research is doing that. And yeah, I don't know if I even ever told you that, but that's why that tree is in the middle.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, no, I love it. So we are running out of time, and so I think we are going to have to wrap up the panel at this point. We're going to stick around a few minutes next to the exhibit in case anybody has any questions there. But I guess I'll just say I want to thank everyone who's part of the panel. Thank you all for coming. And I think just, you know, for the educators, for the learners, like hopefully this inspires some different approaches to climate education in the classroom, one that has kind of a positive outlook to the future, engages with the future creatively, but also recognizes the emotional dimension of engaging with climate change, which can be messy. And we kind of all have to find creative ways to get through it, and stories can help us do that. So thank you again for coming. Thank you, everybody.